Dear EKI Indomitables, let us start our academic conversation with the Porter 5-force model. As I have already reiterated to you, for understanding your Samsung case, Porter 5-force model is technically not required. But Porter's diamond model is very important in trying to explain the case. And for understanding the diamond model, it is better that we know the basic Porter 5-forces model. So that is where we start Porter's 5-forces model. Slide number 2. When we did a small dipstick yesterday, I was quite happy to know that some of you are already exposed in some way to the basic Porter 5-force model. So here it goes. Porter 5-force model talks to you about what are those 5 forces or 5 threats, if you may, which inhibit the profit making capability of a given firm within a given industry. So which is force number 1? Force number 1 is obviously industry rivalry. You are always in the middle of some industry and there are other players in the industry. Say 6 or 7 players in telecom, 10 or 15 players in automobile, 6 or 7 players in auto ancillary. So 10 to 15 top-notch B schools and maybe another 40, 50 more B schools. So in any industry, there is an intrinsic automatic rivalry and you are stuck at the middle of that rivalry. The next two are vertical forces, and you can consider these forces to be supply chain forces. I would prefer to use the word value chain forces. Before you, in the upstream, there are suppliers and they can exert their bargaining power on you. And after you, in the downstream, there are your buyers and they too can exert bargaining power on you. So, the force that is exerted on you, on the industry, by people along the vertical value chain can be split into two: bargaining power of suppliers and bargaining power of buyers. So we finish 3 of the Porter 5 forces. The fourth and the fifth one are horizontal forces. I'll spend a minute down the line in trying to explain what's the difference between a horizontal force and a vertical force. Let me finish what I want to tell you right now. The fourth threat is the threat of a new entrant. You are already in a reasonably crowded market in terms of so many people trying to compete for a given market pie. And then suddenly there is a new entrant who is coming into the same market and he would eat into your existing market share. So that is threat number 4. And the last threat is not somebody who is trying to sell an identical thing, but somebody who is going to give a value proposition which is more or less equivalent to what you are currently enjoying. So, industry rivalry and new entrants will eat into your market share. The substitute will eat into your market itself. I repeat, industry rivalry is a game of market share. If there are 6 players, then I get only that fractionated portion. New entrant again is related to market share because the moment he comes in an identical market, he is going to take some part of my market share. But the substitute is planning to offer something to this market which doesn't really eat my market share because he is not offering what I am offering, but he takes away a chunk of my market itself. If I try to divide what is horizontal and what is vertical, which I promised I'll get back to you, 3 of the forces are horizontal. Industry rivalry, horizontal plane, eats market share. New entrant, horizontal plane, again eats your market share. And substitute eats the market itself, eats the size of the market itself. A simple example, there are 10 players selling computers. If a 11th player comes in to sell computers, he is going to eat into your market share. But then if Amazon is going to bring in cloud computing, then the market of cloud computing will reduce the market of computers itself. So he is directly affecting your market size rather than the market share. And when you look at it vertically, suppliers and buyers affect your margin. So the horizontal players affect market share or market size, and vertical players affect margins. Understood? Slide number 3. Before we try to understand real market examples, a simplified example would put Porto FIFOs in real context. Take the Amrita University, which is nestled near the Sahyadri Mountains in Ettimalai, a small village near Coimbatore. As you would see here, there is a railway track which separates the bulk of the city from the campus. So the campus is nestled between a railway track and the ringed mountains around it. I'm trying to visually show you the railway track before we build the case that I'm trying to explain to you. So this is that railway track, and immediately after the railway crossing, you would find the industry which I'm trying to talk about. The industry is a set of auto rickshaws. 6 of them, let us assume. Number doesn't matter. Just for an explanation, let us think there are just 6 of them. And this small ecosystem are rivals. The only business that they can get is from Amrita University. And when things are normal, there is a fixed amount of profit, and they beautifully divide that particular profit amongst themselves. They don't get the whole profit because there are already 6 of them. So technically speaking, there is a sense of rivalry, though they could be friends. What about the next threat? The next threat is the bargaining power of the supplier. To simplify the whole game, when you're traveling along this road, you hit the main road, which is the Coimbatore Palghat main road, and right on the main road you have the supplier. And any hike in petroleum price, petrol is obviously the biggest supply to these chaps, and that hike is either going to affect them in terms of customers cribbing about a price increase, or going to affect them in terms of reduced margin if they are not going to increase the price. So straight away you understand the bargaining power of suppliers. The next is the buyer, who is the Amrita kid. The kids who are located in this particular campus are the only ones who are going to patronize these particular auto rickshaws. And they would know their own techniques of trying to pile on, have 4 people in one rig, 6 people in one rig, negotiate, etc. So they would use what we call as the classic bargaining power of the buyer. Who is the new entrant? There is no governmental regulation that can stop the 7th auto to come to the same spot. So the moment the 7th auto comes, nothing else changes. The university is still the same. The number of students are still the same. But the total profit that could have come out of a day's business, now rather than getting split among 6, gets split among 7. So that is the threat of a new entrant. So we've covered four of the forces: rivalry, suppliers, buyers, a new entrant. The last threat is the substitute. Imagine that there is no train at 4:30 towards either Coimbatore or Palghat, and suddenly government introduces a train which stops at Ettimadai signal. There is a station nearby called Ettimadai station somewhere here. There is a station somewhere here, walking distance from the campus. And suppose there is a train at 4:30. That train will take a huge chunk of possible travelers immediately after college to either Coimbatore or Palghat. So these are the five forces which define this small ecosystem, and you would easily find that each of those forces is a threat that eats into the profit making capability of the original six auto rickshaws. You can scale up that to six firms. Dear friends, we are into the last but one slide, and I need you to appreciate the Porter five forces model as a risk mitigation model. The industry that we are talking about are six auto rickshaws, and what we need to find out is how the individual auto, think in your mind, the individual firm can cope with each of these threats given the fact that the threat is definitely there. How do you cope with the threat? The options that I'm going to give you can either be understood in the context of the simple auto game or be scaled up to understand bigger and more realistic situations. Not all of them map exactly, but you would get a feel. Let us now specifically talk about this particular auto and how he is going to cope with each of the five threats. Rivalry. What does he do? He thinks immediately of a product differentiation. My engine is a back engine vehicle, so it's less noisy, more comfortable. My auto has got good music. Type of music which you want, I have it. I am a good conversationalist. He doesn't mention that to you, but he does some nice, smooth talking. You would always remember 50% of the cabbies engage you in conversation, 50% do not. The ones who engage you understand without going to a B school and learning Porter Pfeiffer's model that conversation is a very powerful tool to create that positive edge of differentiation. You would tend to remember him, and journey to Coimbatore is about 60 minutes from the campus. We might as well talk. So I would tend to remember that particular rickshaw chap who tends to talk a bit more rather than the dour chap who does not talk at all and wait for his rickshaw to come. So given the fact that the rivalry is there, I score by differentiation. What about bargaining power of supplier? The moment the government increases the price, I piggy ride on that increase and I raise my fare. Anything wrong? Not very sure, but then my sympathies as a customer would go to the auto chap. And beyond increasing the fare legitimately, which the meter is going to reflect, he would, for lack of a better word, shamelessly ask for that extra buck. Some do, some might not. Sir, what are we going to sir? Well, that is how he tries to mitigate the bargaining power that is exerted on him by the supplier on which he has no control. Third, bargaining power of the buyer. What do? You cartelize. So many industries understand the power of cartelization very well. these chaps would come to a consensual decision that though they are technically rivals, they are affected by the same buyer power in an identical way. So I will not take more than 4 people. I will not take more than 6 people. After 10 o'clock at night, I'm going to charge 50% more, etc. So these are cartelized rules that they will all follow to ensure that buyers do not squeeze them out. The fourth one is the threat of new entrant. They would obviously use the power of unionization wherever possible to do an organized resistance to ensure that when there are n number of players already in the industry, I do not want player number n plus 1 to understand. The badges which are issued by taxi stands do exactly the same. In a given taxi stand, only this many number of taxis are permitted. The next one is not permitted. And finally, the last one. This applies only to this particular scenario. I can do preciously nothing to avoid or to stop a new train that comes in the Coimbatore Palghat route. I can do absolutely nothing. So what do? I take my normal off time. I go through the pangs of lunch and sit there without having my lunch. And by the time it is 3:30 and the train is another half an hour away, I go home, take my lunch, and do a nice afternoon siesta. So by the time I wake up, I have avoided the critical timing in which the train comes. So avoidance is a good enough way to counter the threat of substitutes. Friends, that brings us to the last slide of this presentation. I thought of closing the whole thing in about 15 minutes, but my recording meter shows that we are into the 17th minute. So 18, 19 minutes shouldn't really hurt us. Let us try to look at the airline industry and try to find out what is the 5-force scenario for the Maharaja for Air India. Rivalry is obvious. Indigo in terms of punctuality, Go, Spice, Vistara in their own small niche terms, trying to give point-to-point connectivity, adding newer cities, changing timings, etc., and in their own way contribute to that game called rivalry. Bargaining power of suppliers. For an airline, the biggest supply is obviously the aircraft in terms of capex, and there are only 2 players, Boeing and Airbus, and you can't do much of negotiation with them in the sense they have a higher negotiating power, they have a higher bargaining power. When it comes to OPEX or operating expenditure, you have your Shell, your BP, your IOCL, and the cost of turbine fuel on a day-to-day basis and its fluctuations are going to seriously erode your profitability. Talking about buyers, needs no explanation at all that the number of people who throng the airport as well as the airline and their nuanced behavior is going to simply eat into your profitability, and if you're not doing a right job, they vote with their feet. They simply walk away from you. The new entrant for this industry, 2015, we had that AirAsia coming to the market and seriously reducing the fare structure or recreating a fare structure, and AirAsia probably is the first player who is truly international, who has been allowed to fly domestic. So that is the threat of the new entrant. And substitute, hold on. Zoom is the substitute. We do not need to travel at all today to meet and talk. Currently, I'm talking to so many of you, so many are listening to me, and we are not meeting at all. So Zoom or video conferencing could be, in the long run, a very, very powerful substitute to airline industry. With that, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. 20 minutes up. Thank you.